Okay, Erev Tov. So the previous time we met, we started this topic of strengthening Jewish identity and halacha in a Jewish state that's not halachic. And we spent 3/4 of our time, about 75% of our time, making the list of topics that we will discuss. And thank God we have a lot to discuss. And we used the last 15 minutes to begin discussing the content itself. We spoke about religion, true religious devotion, being something that comes out of free will and not something that someone is forced to do. So what we're really looking for is not to have political influence on what happens in the state of Israel and the people of Israel, but to get people connected from their own free will. And yet, on the public level, it is legitimate to struggle over what kind of a state, what kind of a society, what Jewish identity, how we want it to be expressed in our society. It's legitimate to struggle and be part of a social struggle about how that's going to work. And then we have to ask ourselves, how valuable is it? What is it important? Is it not important? Does it do good? Detrimental? Is it constructive or destructive? These are things that we will discuss. We started discussing non-Jews in the state of Israel a little bit, and we'll continue a little bit today. And then I'd like to jump to the total other extreme. One of the issues that we have to challenge, one of the challenges today and in all ages, is the issue of having a state that cares about people, that is loving and respecting and taking care of people, and at the same time, it fulfills the mitzvot of the Torah. It is Jewish, and it opposes avodah zarah, idolatry. It opposes things and it struggles against things that are immoral on the regular human level, and immoral on a higher Jewish level. It struggles against, as I said, lack of faith or blasphemy, or what would be a good word for kfirah, heresy, lack of belief in Hashem, and idol worshiping. It also struggles against, as I said, immoral things. That the top, the number one immoral action would be killing someone, murder, but that's just the top of the list. But anything that has to do with violence or lack of morality. And I would add to that the three most important mitzvot of the Torah. So the third one would be Gilui Arayot, incest. And so issues of all these things are things that the Jewish state must excel in them and must fight against people who don't. So we have to keep that in mind. There's a tension here between being respectful of everyone and giving everyone space on the one hand, and maintaining the Jewish state, both in its Jewish identity and in its belief. It's before halachot, just the basics of belief in Hashem and morality and the way the society conducts itself in issues of relationships between men and women. All this is something that we have to struggle for, and to struggle for the Jewish values in these issues, we have to struggle against people who act in extreme ways, at least in extreme ways, that are opposed to the Jewish way in these issues. And that's a tension, because it's nice to say that we want them to go together, but they clash because we have foreign workers who come with idols or with festivals and with actions of idol worshiping. We have people who come and act in immoral ways, and we want to respect them on the one hand. We don't want to accept their immorality on the other hand. We want to respect everyone. We don't want religion to be done by force. But on the other hand, we want to put in place boundaries when it comes to behavior on sexual issues and that whole sphere. And the same is true with moral issues and with religious issues, at least as far as idol worshiping and worshiping other religions and so on. And this all does create a tension. We do agree I think we can agree, if we make broad strokes, I think we can agree that on the one hand, we're not going to force religion, we're not going to physically prevent other religions in the state of Israel today. We spoke about this 2 weeks ago. In a world which is global, people, human beings, everything that happens in one place in the world happens everywhere else at the same time because of the global connections and networks and worldwide webs that we're all connected. So it's not going to happen by force, and that technological change creates a spiritual change because everybody is intertwined with everyone else, and it's going to have to be done by convincing, by bringing a light to the world and not by force. At the same time, we do want to keep certain boundaries within the state of Israel, but even that we have to do in a democratic way. If we can strengthen Jewish identity, I would say if we do it from within, that will also strengthen the conviction in the state of Israel, in the Jewish society in Israel, about the question of where we draw the lines and how we put them into place. And that would be the way to go about it. And I would like to, these are things that we discussed 2 weeks ago. Maybe the last point is a little bit new. If we succeed in spreading in a positive way, not by force, if we succeed in spreading in the Israeli society, Jewish society in Israel, the conviction, a strong conviction of Jewish identity, then it's easier to put in place boundaries, not accept a person, not to be violent, physically violent against a person, but to put in place certain restrictions and boundaries about what is allowed in the state of Israel without going down to the level of interfering with people's individual lives, but at least publicly. So that's one step that I would say is something that we should be doing. Okay, so that's one issue. Strengthening ourselves from within enables us all to have clearer boundaries when we look outside of the Jews. Another issue where we will find this topic is that in the Torah, when Bnei Israel are sent to Eretz Israel, we are told about the Knaanim who were living here, we were told either to kill them or to, what's the word in Hebrew, legaresh, to
chase them out. Chase them out.
Expel.
Expel is good.
Expel them.
Expel them from Israel, which we did to some extent, not to a full extent. The fact that we didn't perform that to a full extent, we see in Sefer Yoshua, mostly in Sefer Shoftim, and from there on, that we never were able to reach the full creation of the Jewish state. And so now we have two extremes in Israel today. We have those who look at Tanakh and say, copy-paste. What we were told to do then is what we have to do today. We should expel all non-Jews from Israel. I've mentioned this before. I ask people, where do you think we stand today? If you ask yourself, is today Geulah? Well, it's not complete Geulah. It's certainly not Mashiach. We are not in complete Geulah. If you ask me, we're certainly not in zero Mashiach. We're certainly not in void of any Geulah. We're somewhere on the road between the beginning of Geulah and the completion of Geulah. We're somewhere on the way between, let's say, between 1% and 99%. So we're not at zero and we're not at 100. We're somewhere in between. And I like to ask people, where do you think we are in between? Are we at 5, at 20, at 70? And I get varied answers from about 5 to 95. These are the kind of answers that I get, and I break it down into separate issues, and maybe we'll discuss this as a workshop at some point. But one of the reasons people say we're not in Geulah, people say because there are goyim in Israel. And I say to them, where does it say in the Torah that they're not allowed to be goyim in Israel? Where does it say in the Torah that in the time of redemption, there are no non-Jews in Israel? It doesn't say that. But maybe what influences their thinking this way is the mitzvah that was given to the Jews upon coming into Eretz Israel to either kill or expel Amim, the nations of Canaan. By the way, there are opinions, prevalent opinions, that if they wanted to accept the Jewish sovereignty,
Right.
and stay and refrain from idol worshiping and accept the Noahide laws, meaning they didn't have to convert, they don't have to be Jewish, they have to not worship idols, they have to accept the basics of Noahide laws, meaning morality, not idol worshiping, as I said, not incest and things like that. They could, and maybe there, and according to Sefer Yoshua, yes, there were some, and according to the Chazal, the sources of the rabbis, there was a minority of them who did decide to do that. But again, there are extremists. I would consider them extremists who in Israel today say, we look at Tanakh, copy paste. Let's do again what we were told to do then. And it's not at all clear that this is the right way to go, because that was a command in one specific historic context. Those nations of Canaan were very, very, very strong in a negative way in their idol worshiping, in their lack of morality, in their sexual conduct, which was part of their idol worshiping. In the ceremonies, in the, how do you say, the religious
practices.
Religious
rites.
practice. Sorry?
Rights.
Maybe
Practices.
Part of the
Rituals. Rituals.
Yes, as part of the rituals, there was sexual access, part of the rituals, and a terrible violence. So they were a great example of the opposite of Am Yisrael that had to be expelled at that time in order for Am Yisrael to create the basic ability of Am Yisrael to grow and thrive and bring the light to the world from Eretz Yisrael. But we've gone a long way since then. And the ancient nations were barbarian, but the nations today are different. And even if a person is an idol worshiper, like a Buddhist, that doesn't mean that he's a violent person, that he's a bad person. It's very different. But add to that such a large part of the world today are believers in one God. Billions of Muslims, billions of Christians, they believe in one God. So we've gone a long way from the time of Yehoshua and after Yetziat Mitzrayim of Am Yisrael coming into Eretz Yisrael. So you can make, even in the halacha, without these changes, there is the possibility of a non-Jew, even in the time of Yehoshua, accepting the Noahide laws, refraining from idol worshiping and violence and incest, and living in Am Yisrael, accepting the sovereignty of Am Yisrael, and living with the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. And the halachot of the Torah, in that situation, say you have to take care of them. When you give tzedakah, you give to the non-Jews as well. When you create a social justice system, it includes the non-Jews. When you create a medical system, it includes the non-Jews and so on, and they get equality in that sense. And there is a halacha called ger toshav, meaning someone who does not convert to Judaism. He's a non-Jew who is like a stranger in Israel. He's not the majority, he's a minority, and he doesn't have to accept the Jewish religion. He does have to accept Am Yisrael, and that the country is led by the Torah, and he has to adhere to the Noahide laws in that sense. And then we have an argument amongst different rabbis, because in order to have that, you also have to have the full Beit Din, the Sanhedrin, the Shemitah, everything in place. All of Torah, the fulfillment of the mitzvot of the Torah, everything in place. When we have all that in place, then we can have a Beit Din, and a non-Jew can come in front of the Beit Din, not to convert, but to convert to Noahide. Not to convert to Jew, to convert to be a Noahide, to say, I accept the Torah, I accept that the commandment of Hashem for non-Jews is the Noahide laws, and I will keep them. And then he can live in Israel, be a citizen of the state of the Jews, and be a non-Jew. And so because today we can't implement that fully, so the question is it all or nothing? Do we say because we can't implement that, so there's no such thing as ger toshav, zero possibility of toshav today? There are halachic authorities that say, no, we do have a certain level of Gel Toshav by the fact that a non-Jew lives by the no-hide laws. If he accepts Islam and he does not, and he's not an Islamic fundamentalist trying to kill those who are not Muslims and so on, and doesn't fight against the state of Israel, then he has a certain acceptance of Ger Toshav, and he can be accepted. Christianity is a little more subtle because in Christianity there are statues and belief in the Son of God and things like that. So there's a lengthy, intricate discussion about Christianity. Is it idol worship? Is it avodah zarah or not? Even about Islam, there is a little bit, but generally accepted that it's not. I would say generally the thought about Christianity is that it is, but not necessarily, because it's very intricate, it's very delicate, because what do they really believe in? What does it mean, the Son of God? What do the statues mean? And they do believe in one God above everything. So you could make a case to claim that Christianity is not idol worshiping as well. And then we have to add in the Meiri. The Meiri, Rabbi Menachem Meiri, who lived around the 13th, 14th century in Provence, in southern France. And he wrote in several places in his Talmudic writings that the laws that we see in the halacha about non-Jews are about barbarian nations that did not have any morality and any restrictions. But, and he's saying this not today, he's saying this 700 years ago, but those non-Jews who we live amongst them, and they have laws and restrictions and all kinds of things in place. Again, this is not the 20th century. This is the 13th, 14th century. And they believe in some kind of religion, even though their faith is far from our faith. Their theology is different than our theology. And they did not accept not to believe in the Son of God or things like that, but just the fact that they have a religion and they have an orderly state and a code of morality, and they're different than those nations of Canaan that we discussed before. So the Meiri says about them, we don't have all these laws. All the things that are said about non-Jews are not said about them. For example, if someone lost, we have the mitzvah in the Torah, Hashavat Avedah. You have to return something that someone else lost. Another Jew lost something. Find it, you have a halachic obligation to return it to him. What about if the person who lost this object is a non-Jew? So and the Rambam brings it in his codification. You're not allowed to return the lost object to the non-Jew. It says in the Torah that the object that was lost from achicha, from your brother. And so we learn from that it's only from our brothers, only from Jews. A non-Jew, the Rambam says, you don't return to them what they've lost, because you're strengthening idol worshippers. You're helping the wicked people of the world. So says the Meiri, that was true when anyone who was not Jewish, most of them were barbarian and not moral and so on. But the non-Jews that we live with them, again, 700 years ago, they have laws, they have moral codes, they have religions, even though they're far from our religions. And you do return something that they've lost. You do return it to them because you're not helping, you're not strengthening the wicked, as we were saying. And he goes around about this issue in many different things relating to non-Jews, possibly even in one place, saying maybe this is the first hint to this attitude, that you should, if you have to, in order to save a non-Jew's life, you desecrate the laws of Shabbat, like a Jew. Pikuach nefesh, chilul Shabbat, because of pikuach nefesh, would be applicable to a non-Jew who is not like those ancient barbarians, maybe even going that far. Without discussing that in detail, I'm just quoting the Meiri to say that we see, and this is several hundred years ago, so kal v'chomer, much more so today. Again, we have to differentiate between certain nations or individuals and the general way of most people in the world today. Of course, this would not include the Islamic State, what was it called? That was so strong some 5-7 years back.
ISIS.
Al-Qaeda.
Gosh, ISIS.
ISIS, exactly.
Yeah.
Those who are beheading people who they don't like and so on are not within this description of the Meiri, but most non-Jews in the world and in Israel would not would be in those criteria, within those criteria that the Meiri was discussing. So put all these things together. I don't think that today we have any commandment to expel like the nations of Canaan when Yehoshua came here. I don't think we have to act that way, even if a person is Christian or Muslim or even Buddhist and has idols. It's not the same as what the world was in the past. And if they're not missionaries, they're not going around making a mission of bringing Jews into Christianity, into other religions. And if they're not going around opposing the state of Israel and so on, then I don't believe that we should be in a war against them. And so that calling upon that command in the Torah from the time of Yehoshua and trying to implement that as copy-paste today, I think is wrong. The other extreme is people who don't want to have any boundaries. We accept everyone. We're all equal. This is a state of all its, in Hebrew, it's called Medinat Kol Ezracheh. We want to be a state of all its citizens. We want to be a liberal democracy. No Jewish identity. You can follow Judaism. You can practice Judaism, and they can practice what they want, but the country will not have an identity. And I think they're making two mistakes. One is there's place for one Jewish state in the world. And we have a majority, I believe, because of all the demonstrations about the legal reform going on in our country now, I've had the opportunity to meet someone who I firmly disagree with, and we've been having some discussions, hoping to put together a meeting of people with opposite opinions to start listening to one another, because we all talk to our own like-minded friends, and we don't discuss and listen to the people that disagree with us. And so we're thinking of putting together some kind of meeting of that kind, and so with him as well, I'm trying to stress this point. You know, I think there is a very strong majority, strong democratic majority of the Jews in Israel who want a state with Jewish identity. And I think that's the way to bring it about. It won't be within exactly halachic boundaries, but it will be able to be a strong Jewish identity. It has to put in place certain limitations on things that will be destructive to Judaism. And here's another sensitive point. I do think that there's an issue of how many Jews and how many non-Jews there are in Israel. If Israel becomes flooded with more and more and more and more non-Jews, in the end, we will become a minority. We can't maintain a Jewish state if we are a minority. Right. But the way to struggle with this is not by expelling non-Jews. It's by having Jewish children and bringing aliyah and, encouraging birth of more Jewish children and encouraging aliyah. I'm not saying how many Jewish children. I don't mean that every family has to have 15 children. You can have anywhere from 2 to 15. That's okay. But in general, as a society, we have to be encouraging Jews to be in Israel and many Jews to be in Israel. And in that way, strengthen our Jewish identity and not by forcefully expelling non-Jews from Israel. And I would say the extremes are mistaken. The extreme that wants to expel non-Jews violently is not what's desirable and what's right for the state of Israel today. The extreme that wants not to have any restrictions, everybody can do their own thing, and we don't have any Jewish identity put in place in the state of Israel, and it doesn't matter, who my kids mix with. Everybody's okay. It's funny. I don't think it's not funny. It's ironic. It's difficult. I don't think that it's wrong for me as a Jew to interact with a non-Jew. I don't think there's anything wrong with a Jew. There is no halacha in the Torah, in the, or
Right.
the oral Torah. There's no halacha against prohibiting a Jew from interacting with a non-Jew,
Right.
discussing with philosophy, morality, all kinds of things. But we have to make sure that it's not endangering my Jewish identity. Here's the irony. Those whose Jewish identity is stronger want to keep away from non-Jews. They don't like interacting with non-Jews. Those who don't care about interacting with the non-Jews are those whose Jewish identity is not as strong.
Right.
And that's where it's sensitive, because I would like people with strong Jewish identity to meet with non-Jews, to interact with them, to discuss
Right.
with them, learn from them things, but maintain our Jewish identity. But when the people who don't have Jewish education and strong Jewish identity interact with non-Jews, then they're mixing, and that's creating assimilation and creating, what's the word I'm missing here? It's kind of creating a mix, and they don't have for their own selves, for their own families, for their children, they don't have the framework within to keep their Jewish identity. So it's ironic, but again, I can't force upon them to have a Jewish identity. It has to be done in a positive, constructive way, and we'll have to get back to that. What I'm saying is I'm opposing an extreme position that says, I don't care, we can mix with everybody, everybody's equal, we're all the same, and we don't care about Jewish identity. I want to be respectful of all people. I want to keep for myself and my Jewish friends and the Jewish society in the state of Israel a strong Jewish identity, and we have to think about how to go about it and reject. I would reject in half a minute. I'm going to open up for discussion. Tova, you'll be first. I want to reject the extremes. One extreme that says, I don't care, we're all the same, everybody mixed with everybody. And the other extreme that says, well, in order to maintain a Jewish state, we have to expel all non-Jews and not have any non-Jews or people who are not accepting the Jewish religion in Israel. I want to reject those two. And that doesn't mean that I've solved all the problems, but I have an attitude of how things should be done. Tova, bevakasha.
Sorry. I wanted to ask about the fact that should we have in Israel parades, Christian parades, when they parade with idols, with their statues, the statues in Jerusalem and other cities where they're Christians. Is that something that should be allowed here, should be accepted? I don't know.
Very delicate. It's very delicate because I'll give you an example. My wife and I were walking one day on the outskirts of the old city in Jerusalem, and I see a Jewish religious couple, walking in the opposite direction from us, and a child of theirs behind them kicking some book on the floor. And they kept on walking. And when we passed by, I wanted to see what's this book that they were kicking on the floor. It was the New Testament.
Aye.
And I picked it up. And I didn't want to see this kid kicking around the New Testament on the floor, just like I wouldn't want to see a Christian kid kicking the Old Testament
Exactly.
or kicking the Tanakh or so on. Picked it up. Now what do I do with it? And then the next couple that I see coming in our direction is a Christian couple.
So you gave it to them.
I said, here, this is yours. Spoke to them for a moment.
That's the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do.
And now there are Jews in Israel. You ask them and they will implement the halacha. We're supposed to burn it. It's a book of blasphemy. It's the New Testament. It's kfirah mamash. It believes in Jesus and the change of Israel, the new Israel instead of the old Israel. And in the basics, I agree with that, but I don't want to perform it violently because, as I said before, it's a global world.
Right.
Jews to be able to parade in New York in their support of Israel. Are you going to say they walk with flags, Israeli flags, and Maginei David and a Sefer Torah, and Christians in Israel can't walk with a cross? That's not going to be acceptable in the world today. You want to do something, you have to convince. It's no longer relevant to prohibit it. You can if the Jewish identity in the state was stronger, maybe we could have some minimal restrictions. I'm not even sure about that because the world is global. Until the world accepts the Torah of Moshe and not the things that came afterward instead of the Torah of Moshe, like the New Testament and the Quran. I don't see that globally this kind of thing would be acceptable. And I would add, like I said before, even the Christians walking with the cross is not inevitably idolatry because of many reasons, because of all kinds of discussions in Masechet Avodah Zarah that they don't really believe in these statues as gods, but it's a symbol, and it's not something that they worship as an idol, because of the Meiri that we mentioned before, and there are several other sources. So I think halachically it's acceptable to allow them to perform that parade, and I think that has to be accepted. To answer your question, and I would add one: three main medieval Jewish philosophers, Maimonides, the Rambam, and Nachmanides, Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, and Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Sefer HaKuzari. All three of them made the point that in Christianity and Islam, they are a step on the path to redemption, to Mashiach, because they bring into the world, because they spread in much larger numbers than us. They spread belief in one God and the expectation of a day of redemption, of Mashiach. So the Christians believe that the Mashiach has already come, the Messiah has already come. He died, he was resurrected, he died again, he's going to be resurrected once again. But there is an idea of redemption and of one God in the world, and similar things in Islam. So I would also say these are points that that we have to look for in other religions. We do not have to, and we should not accept them as a religion. But that doesn't mean that they should totally be obliterated and there's nothing there for us to connect with. There are things for us to connect with there. Again, if your Jewish identity is not strong and you're going to decide to take a course in Christianity, then I'm going to ask you, I don't know if I will, I would like to ask you, depends who you are, how close I am with you. But in my own mind, I would like to ask you, have you taken a course in Judaism? Do you devote an hour a week to study Torah? That you're devoting an hour to Christianity? You know, after you devoted 10 years studying Judaism, X hours a week, you also want to learn about other nations and religions in the world. I grasp that. I can understand that. I can see it as positive. But if you're studying Christianity or comparative religions, and you don't devote time to study your own Judaism, again, I can't force you to do it, but I think there's a lack of balance here. My opinion is there's a lack of balance here. But if you do study Torah and you've devoted time in your life to study Judaism, then I would think if you also want to understand and look for points of agreement and points that you can learn from other religions, at that point, I would think that's something positive.
Okay, thank you.
Eliezer.
So what I'm worried about or concerned about is Judaism is concerned with Jewish values, right? I mean, like, and if you can learn Jewish values from non-Jews, such as Thomas Jefferson, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it seems that in certain ways, I mean, it's to reject that and accept Jews who don't have Jewish values or who don't practice Jewish values, even if they declare themselves as Jews, there seems to be some hypocrisy in that, or something basically wrong. That always bothers me.
Well, but it depends what you mean. Do you mean Jews who don't care about Jewish values, or Jews who care about Jewish values, but you disagree with what they call Jewish values?
No, if they don't care about treating the ger properly, or if they don't care about a proper judicial system, which in fact Moshe received the judicial system on advice of a non-Jew to some degree. That's the kind of thing that I mean. Or somebody's corrupt in government. I mean, like it seems that just to declare I'm Jewish and therefore I can do whatever I want to do, it seems to be a terrible approach.
Okay, but you're saying something different. You're saying something about hypocrisy coming from a person who ignores certain parts of Judaism, and at the same time he's more negative towards non-Jews who actually practice some of the Jewish values, and more positive towards Jews because they're born Jewish and they ignore certain Jewish values. I would say it's complex, meaning what's more painful? God forbid, I don't want any of the following, but which one is more painful? If, God forbid, one of my children would marry a very moral non-Jew, or if one of my children would marry a very Jewish, violent person.
Well,
I want to have to deal with this question, okay?
well, when we were studying Jeremiah, it kept on hitting home. He would say, the state of Israel is doomed because of its leadership, and what did the leadership do? They probably were very Jewish. Like they, I mean, I don't know. There were also problems with idol worship, but
idol worship and of corruption and of violence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to give a weight to each of the things, but I mean, the thing that led to the immediate destruction, if I remember properly, was the fact that people stopped freeing their slaves, or unfree their slaves.
It's one of the factors. It's not, I don't know if you can say that that's the cause. It's one of the chapters. Like you say, there were also issues of idol worshiping, and it's hard to say how much weight each part carries. It's hard to say. It's certainly part of the reason of destruction. I can't say it's the reason of the destruction. But again, I understand the complexity. I understand the complexity. I just think it's complex. I don't think it's easy to decide which is worse. I'm not going to ask which is better because they're both negative, but it's not. It's easier for me to be in a positive relationship with a moral non-Jew than with an immoral Jew. But at the same time, as I said, once we, what's more difficult to accept into my family, it's a more difficult question. So it's a complexity of the content of Judaism and keeping within the fold of the Jewish people. Like I said, I don't want to have to deal with that question personally. I want to continue to encourage that we reject both and try to make Judaism, Jews better, to make the world better.
Rabbi,
Mike?
I've been very quiet trying to think which part of the many pieces that you've put in front of us I really wanted to take on here. You can go micro or you can go macro, and it seems to me that the way you set this out, it's more of a macro issue first. How do we live in a state that we want to be a Jewish state. What's the purpose of that state? Does it go against the purpose of that state to have a lot of non-Jews living in the Jewish state? And at what point will it not be a Jewish state if we're overwhelmed by non-Jews? And it's a real question. I think the history of the last 100 years has shown us how vulnerable the Jewish people are if you don't have that Jewish state as a protector, as a refuge, as a place to gather together. And the Jewish people are always stronger when we're united. One of the issues that's so troubling to me right now, and I'm sure to many other people, is the disunity that we're seeing here in Israel over what seems to be a specious argument. I don't quite understand all of the emotional, almost violence that we're seeing over this judicial review issue. If that's the question you're going to be discussing in your group, and you'll do it in English, I'll be happy to be part of that. But it seems to me that if we're going to welcome non-Jews to the state of Israel, they need to follow some criteria. And you set out some of that criteria as far as things that they believe in, things that they don't believe in. But I think behavior has to be number one. If we've got a large population of people that feel like they are dispossessed of their own land, I don't see that turning out well. And either they have to find a way to come to grips with the idea that they are going to be living in a land that belongs to the Jews, they need to move, or we need to somehow deal with that issue. I don't see that coming as much from the Christians. It's certainly coming from a lot of the Muslims.
Right.
By the way, Michael, some Jews, Israel lovers of the state of Israel, Zionists, religious people, care very much about Jewish identity. And because of first of all, I have to say I agreed with everything you said, even though we might reach different resolutions on the bottom line, because we may put the different pieces in place a little differently in their balance, but I don't think we disagree on any one of the points as a specific, maybe about the balance between the different parts. But there are religious people and non-religious people, but who care very much about the Jewishness of the Jewish state, about the Jewish identity, and at the same time want to maintain morality and don't want to have this situation of having other people who want to have a different state here and so on, and have to rule over them in a way which is something that they actually want to overthrow and so on. So one possible solution that they come up with is let's separate, and that goes for the two-state solution, not because you're a democratic American in the US, but because you're a Jew in Israel, you care about Judaism and morality, and so that's your solution. Personally, I don't agree with that solution, but I understand where they're coming from. I understand their considerations and why they want it. And I agree with all their, like I said to you, I agree with them about every one of the criteria or the reasoning, the parts of the reasoning, but I disagree with the bottom line for a few different reasons. One of them is security. I don't think it will be good for us. And the other is, I don't think that's the right way to go about it in the long run. But let's go back to you. I agree about putting limitations on behavior. I mentioned a few, maybe I hinted to it, maybe I have to say it more clearly. Missionary should not be accepted in Israel. You want to come here and practice Christianity in your church, I'm not going to try and prevent that. But you want to come here and be a missionary and try and pull Jews into Christianity, that's endangering us. And we have the right to protect our own. Another is violence. You know, if you're a violent person, if you're a criminal, and you come from a different country, I don't think we have the responsibility inevitably to accept you. I think we have the right to expel a person in a situation like that, or return him to his country of origin. There are international laws about what's the term in English, in Hebrew it's called hasgara, of handing over someone to the country where he came from, like to stand trial.
Mhm.
What's the word? What's the legal term in English? Anyone know?
Extradite, to extradite.
Right, extradite, right.
There are
Extradition,
laws
yes.
of extradition. In international law, there are laws of extradition. I just learned in the last 2 years, and I never remember it offhand, I would have to look it up, that there is, I believe he was an Italian philosopher or actually a lawyer, a professor of law, or whatever it was, and he put in place the what is today for 100 or 200 or 300 years accepted as the international laws of extradition.
Mm.
And he learned them. I was so happy when I saw this. He learned them from the Torah. He learned them from 2 mitzvot in the Torah. One of them is the mitzvah where the Torah says that if a slave don't return him to his owner, he
Right.
ran away his freedom, don't hand him back to his owner. Incidentally, put this in parentheses, in the Hammurabi laws, there's an explicit law, return him to his owner.
To return, right.
And in Torah, there's an exactly opposite law. It says, do not return him to his owner.
Right.
Interesting. The other law in the Torah is there was a law amongst the nations that if a person ran to the
Altar, to the altar.
yes, Tova, 1 second. To the how do you dash to the
Temple.
to the temple, thank you. To their religious temple. And in the temple to the altar, exactly as you were saying, Tova. And he holds on to the altar, Karnot HaMizbeach in Hebrew. Then you don't take him, you know, he has a savior. The law is not allowed to take him. And the Torah says explicitly that if a person escapes to the altar in the Mikdash, and he has transgressed the halacha, that he has the death penalty. The Torah says, you take him from the altar to his death. You cannot, Torah does not accept this kind of magic. You know, if you're holding on to the altar, we're not allowed to take you to perform punishment that the law puts upon you. So this Italian lawmaker puts these 2 together, and based on these 2 halachot, brings to the world what is accepted as the basic international law of extradition, which is if a person is being persecuted in his country of origin for non-just reasons, do not extradite him. You protect it. That's like the slave who has escaped. Do not return him to where he's being to be subject to non-just suffering. If a person wronged, if this person caused harm to someone else in his country of origin and escaped to you to escape the law, then you do extradite him because he should stand trial in the country where he performed this immoral and illegal act. And why am I saying this? Because again, if a person is truly escaping a different country because he committed an illegal act, of course he should be extradited. If he was borderline there, but he's not wanted by the law, but he comes to Israel to be violent in Israel, we have no reason that we have to keep him here. Absolutely not. If a person is being non-justly persecuted in a different country, we should accept. That's international law. It's also Israeli law, but it's not implemented in Israel because usually the Minister of Interior Affairs is for the last several years has been Aryeh Deri, or has been from a religious party, and he doesn't want non-Jews in Israel. So they've accepted about 10 such people from the tens of thousands of people who have escaped to Israel from Africa. Now, I don't think that it's 30,000 of them that are in such a situation, but it's more than 10, meaning they're just not accepting them because they don't want non-Jews. On the other hand, a few years back, every month there were hundreds or thousands of people coming in from Africa. Make it clear, I had of zero, exactly zero interest of me. What is the color of their skin? Exactly zero interest. I do not care. The fact is that they're non-Jews. The facts are that there's tens of thousands of men, not tens of thousands of couples. That makes a big difference.
Right.
And I do not want to expel them. If we can find solutions, that's better. But we were right. I'm not a Netanyahu lover. Netanyahu was right for building a physical border on the border of Egypt that stopped that. Because they were coming in. It was an open border. Once there's a wall, once there's a fence, they can't, because we couldn't just keep on taking them in and continue to maintain a Jewish state. I agree with that. But that doesn't mean, like Begin did in his time, that there's a boat of Vietnamese refugees, a few hundred refugees. We can accept them. We can take care of them, and it won't endanger. There may be a Jewish intermarry because of that, but you know what? Do you know what the percentage of intermarriages in Israel today? It's a terrible number.
Really?
Somewhere from 5 to 7 to 10%.
Really?
Nowhere near any other country in the world where there are Jews where it's 50% and up. I don't know what the numbers are in the US, but I think it's also
Very
about 50,
high. In the US are very high.
maybe
Very high.
50%. In other
At
countries,
least
it's
50.
90%. So the US is in the less negative situation, only 50%. That's horrible. But
Maybe
in
more.
Israel, to 7 to 10%, that's also terrible. But it's not going to be stopped by preventing non-Jews from living here. It's going to be changed by a change in Jewish identity. We have to influence Jewish identity from within, not by fighting against non-Jews. And so to put a border in place that we don't have a flood of hundreds of thousands of non-Jews coming in, that's something we have to take care of. Having lots of refugees or not refugees or people coming in from Russia and Ukraine and their grandfather was Jewish and they're not Jewish, this is an issue. And that's why I am active on conversion, on helping out those whose grandfather was Jewish and want to convert. The most important is the women, of course, so that the next generation they'll get married and have Jewish children. And we have to be proactive on these issues. I would encourage any one of you to be a family that accompanies young olim from whose origins have come on Aliyah, their parents or themselves, now or 15 or 30 years ago from the what used to be the USSR, and they're not Jewish. And let's encourage them to convert and make conversion a little easier, okay? But we have to deal with this issue. But if we have a flood of hundreds of thousands of non-Jews coming into Israel, that is a problem. I agree with that. But I don't think the solution is one specific law-abiding moral person who comes to Israel, no matter what color of skin he has and where he came from. I don't think the right thing is to be against him. I think it's about strengthening ourselves. I agree we have to be realistic. We have to put boundaries in place. So if we're going to be flooded, we have to stop the flood. Let me tell you that in southern Tel Aviv, South Tel Aviv, there are schools where there is a minority of Jews. The kids,
Right.
the children, there's a minority of Jews in the classroom because they're all children of immigrants and only a few Jews left. But why are they all concentrated in South Tel Aviv? Are you willing to accept them in Ra'anana, spread them out to Savion, to Zichron Yaakov, to Haifa, to Be'er Sheva, to
They won't
strong
accept them. People won't accept them.
Israel? So the problem is in the way we handle it. Why are they all concentrating in South Tel Aviv, turning that into little anything else in the world, but not Israel? You know, it's little Italy or little Africa or whatever it is. But that's the problem. The problem is that we concentrate them in one place where we have one of the weaker elements of Israeli society. And we have to strengthen Judaism. So yes, I agree. We have to put boundaries in place We should not allow a flood of hundreds of thousands of non-Jews. And by the way, the numbers are in our favor in the long run. Opposite to some people who try to scare us about that. Of all the Western countries in the world, Israel has the highest birth rate. Israeli Jewish women, I think the birth rate is like 3.7 children for every woman. Of course, anywhere from 40 to 60% of those children are Haredi families. But, love your brother, right? And it's stronger than the Arabs. So the numbers in the long run are still in our favor. But if people leave Israel to relocate, that's the word that we use instead of yerida.
Yerida, right.
In Hebrew, it's called relocation. If people leave Israel, if Jews leave Israel, we're ourselves. If Jews don't make Aliyah, we're not strengthening ourselves. If Jews don't have a Jewish identity, we're weakening ourselves. If Jews don't marry Jews and have some Judaism in their house, we're weakening. And those are the places that I want to fight for, but not by fighting against an individual non-Jew who happened to find his way to Israel, and it's not about him. So again, within boundaries, because if there are going to be hundreds of thousands, then we're creating a big problem for ourselves. But still, that's not the main issue to my mind. I was going to discuss another aspect, but our time is up. So just before we end, if anyone else wants to make a comment, please do. So we're going, yes.
Well, it struck me before when you were talking about the religions, non-Jewish religions that sort of approach idol worship. And to me, that is much less of a threat today to the Jewish people than simply Jews that don't really accept Judaism. I don't see that Jews are drawn to go and worship idols unless you're including things like the idol of climate change or diversity, equity, inclusion, the leftist ideas that seem so attractive to so many people that are really anti-Jewish in many ways. And I see that more. Sorry?
That was our previous topic. The previous series was about that.
Yes. But to me, that also represents idol worship, because it's almost like they create their own religion of those things.
But then you're not restrictions in the sense of you can't allow them to it's not a halachic.
No, you cannot. You cannot say you can't live here and believe that. But right. I think it creates an obligation on us, as exactly what you're saying, to strengthen what Judaism is.
Okay. I would say, again, going back to the two extremes that I rejected, both about ideas and about religions, it's one thing, I would reject both extremes. The extreme that says anything that's not Jewish or is of any kind of, poses any kind of danger to Judaism, even the smallest, should not be allowed in Israel. I would reject that extreme. And the other extreme that says everything is acceptable without any boundaries, I would reject that extreme. And the same is true about religions and about all kinds of ideas that will be detrimental to Judaism. I would look for the positive points. As I said about religions, even in Christianity and Islam, there are certain positive points that I would look for. After I study Torah, I would first spend time studying Torah and spend years studying Torah. And then I would also look to connect and find connections between Jews and Judaism and other nations and even other religions. But I would not not project the kind of notion that it's all the same. Yeah, there are beautiful things in Judaism. Yeah, there are beautiful things in Christianity. Yeah, there are beautiful things in Buddhism. We're all equal. Let's everybody enjoy their whatever religion they choose. I don't want to give that kind of idea of pluralism.
Right.
To give over the idea that there is a God quality in all the different religions. There is a point to connect to, a spark, there's a spark to connect to, and the respect to give to other people because of that spark. And at the same time, it's very important to maintain our own Judaism, and it's the only place in the world where we as a people maintain our Judaism and have a state with Jewish identity. Later on, we will discuss what is destructive and what is constructive about doing this in Israel. What's a constructive way, what's a destructive way to do it? We may agree, we may disagree, but let's look for that together. But right now, I'm just setting the general goal of yes, let's strengthen Jewish identity and be so strong in our Jewish identity that we can connect with sparks, with positive sparks, godly sparks in other people and other religions in a way that will be constructive and will not be destructive. And yes, I am very well aware that in a large part of these Jewish society in Israel, that is not the situation. They don't have the strong Jewish identity, and then to move on to respect other religions. And so I have a problem. So I have to look for constructive ways to strengthen their Jewish identity. That's part of what I would like to discuss. Another thing I would like to discuss later, and maybe I was going to start discussing today, it's obviously put off at least for 2 weeks, actually for 3 weeks, because in 2 weeks it's Purim. So our next meeting will be in 3 weeks. Is to start looking at the other extreme, meaning let's look at extremes of Jews who don't accept certain things about the state of Israel. One thing is not accepting non-Jews. What about Jewish brothers who don't accept the state of Israel because it's not religious? Maybe they're right. Have we listened to what they say? Let's not accept the state of Israel because it's not religious. It's not according to Torah. It's not according to halacha. What about that? Have we dealt with that? Have we thought about that? Have we thought that through? Are there points for us to learn and take from them? So I'd like to discuss a few Haredi attitudes to the state of Israel. And let's hear what they have to say. Let's say what we have to say about what they're saying. Let's listen to them with an open mind and open ear.
So invite somebody. Invite a Haredi to come and help us out.
Maybe I'm going to turn someone in Kinel David into Haredi. Okay. Worse.
Purim's coming.
Okay.
Anybody who participates in this year comes on Purim dressed as Haredi. You got it.
Okay. It's an answer. We can do that. That we can do. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Good night.
Three weeks.
Okay.
All right. Good night.